Welcome to part 80 of my season on Blender 2.7. In this tutorial, we're going to continue on from the last tutorial in which we started looking at painting in Blender, both in the UV image editor window and in the 3D viewport itself. So in this video, we're going to be creating this donut. If you have not seen the last tutorial in this series, I'll put a link to it on the screen right now. Just a note that I recorded this entire part 1 and part 2 in one take, so we're going to jump in. And of course, as always, if you like this video, go ahead and click on that like button below. And if you want to see more videos just like this one in Blender and in tech, go ahead and click on that subscribe button as well. Let's go ahead and jump in. To make our donut, we're going to be using many of the same tools that I just talked about in the first half of this video, and a few more. So if you want to learn even more with texturing, keep on watching and following along. Let's go ahead and delete our default cube. I'll press X on my keyboard to get rid of it. To add a donut shape, I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard to bring up the add menu as always, and I'm going to select torus from that add mesh menu like that. It doesn't matter here that I have extra options. That's just enabled with an add-on in Blender's preferences. So we'll just ignore that, and you can add a torus. Before I do anything in my scene, before I move or rotate or scale this at all, I want to fix the torus's kind of ratio of its inside and outside hole. The hole's too big. So down here at the bottom of your tool shelf, if you can't see this little area, you can click on this little plus down here. This is where you can customize your torus, and we want to change the amount of major and minor segments as well as the minor radius down here. So if I click and drag in this area, you can change your donut to be the ratio that you want. So I think that's probably pretty good right there. I think I need more minor segments. That's the segments that go around the circle. So I'll turn this up to 16. And I think I need fewer major segments. So I'll turn that down to maybe 32. So a nice doubling 16 and 32. We have to add an image onto this torus in order to paint on the torus. Let's go ahead and divide this window up. I don't need a timeline anymore, so I'll get rid of it. I'll right click on the edge between those two windows and say join area, and I'll put my mouse in the timeline with the arrow pointing down, and I'll click to get rid of it. I'm going to divide this window up again just like before, so I'll drag this little triangle area straight down and then divide this window into two just like before. And just like before, I'll change this window into a UV image editor window, and this one into a node editor window. Where is it? It's right there. Of course, we're not working in the right render engine right now. I've made a new file, which means it defaults in Blender to the old Blender render engine. So you have to make sure that you change over to Cycles render, because I want to make a new material now, and materials are of course different in the Cycles render engine. So with the torus selected, I'll go up to the materials tab. I'll click on new to make a new Cycles material, and we have it. I'm going to press Shift A over here in the node editor window, and I'm going to add a texture, an image texture just like before, and I'll connect it up. Of course, we don't have any image yet, so over here I'm going to create a new image by clicking on new. We're going to create a texture called donut texture, and this time I'm going to make my texture 2048 by 2048. That's 2 times 124 by 1024. This is a power of 2, which means that most game engines will support this size. It should be a square for game engines to support the texture, and it's better if it's a power of 2. In this case, it's 2 times 2 times 2, a whole lot until you get to 2048. Great. Let's go ahead and make a starting color for our donut. Our donut's going to be a chocolate donut with a pink glaze, kind of like a Homer Simpson donut. So I'm going to make it an orange color and then a dark orange color, and that's how we get our brown color. Maybe make that a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit less saturated, something like that. Sure, I'm happy with that, sort of. I have a new brown image. I'm going to go to Image and Pack as PNG. Great. In order to get the image onto the donut, I have to choose it over here. So the image texture needs to know what image. It's going to be donut texture, and we have to unwrap the donut. Now I'm not going to mark any seams here. I'm going to do it the lazy way. I'm going to press Tab on my keyboard to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to make sure everything is selected with the A key. I'll press the A key a few times to select everything, and I'll press U to bring up my UV mapping menu, and I'm just going to choose Smart UV Project. That will automatically create the seams for me. And again, I'm going to make sure there is a little bit of margin between the islands, so I'll hold Shift and left click and drag to go slowly up to 0.3 or 0.04. Just like that, and I will press OK, and we get our islands over here, the unwrapped or UV map of the donut. Great. I'll press tab to go back into object mode, and I'll change my viewport shading to material. There is my donut. It needs to be smooth. Great. So on the tool shelf, shading smooth. Looks pretty good to me. I don't want my donut to just be a plain brown donut. I want to make this look pretty detailed. And if you look very closely at a donut, or at least a cartoon donut, there should be a little bit of texturing on the actual baking part, the dough part, the bread part of the donut. So I'm actually going to draw a texture up here in the UV image editor window. So I'm going to go into not view but paint mode, and I'm going to make a new brush. So I'm going to go up here and open up my side panel, and I'm going to use the text draw normal brush, but I'm going to make a new texture, and so I'll click on new, and by default it wants to bring in an image. I don't want that, so over here, in fact I'll name this first. I'm going to call it donut brown. Sure, so I know what it's called. Over here in the texture tab in the properties window, I'm going to make sure I select brush donut brown. I'm going to make this not an image or movie. I'm going to make it a Voronoi texture. In fact, I'm going to customize this with nodes. So over here in my node editor window, I'm going to choose texture and brushes and donut brown. Yeah, that's the one that I want. There are only two. And I'll click on use nodes. Again, I don't know why this is. It defaults it back to checker. I don't like that, but it's the way it is. So I'll get rid of that checker node. I'll press Shift A. I'll add a texture, Voronoi, and put it right there and plug it in. Now with this node you can actually pick your own colors. In fact, I think instead I'm going to use this as a texture mask and not as a texture, and you'll see why in a moment. But what I'll do at this point is I want to make sort of like a series of dots, like a starry night like before, on that side of the cube that I made with the letter F. So I'm going to invert that Voronoi texture. I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard. I'm going to add a color invert node, and I'll put it right there in the middle of that noodle. That'll make white blobs on a black background. I'll press Shift A on my keyboard. I'm going to add the same color RGB curves node like that, and then I'll slide this bottom one over just like before. But this time I'm going to make, I want to leave these a little bit soft. I don't mind there being some more dots. That should be fine. I think it should be fine just like that. If I paint, now I want to make sure that I paint in this window. I have to change into texture paint mode. I have to make sure that my brush is not set to a texture brush, so I'll click on the X. Instead, I'm going to use that same brush as a texture mask, so I can click in this area and choose one of my existing brushes. I'll choose this one, of course. And so now if I paint, I'll press F to make my brush bigger, and if I paint you can see what it's doing, but instead of painting with this white color, I'll press Ctrl Z. I'm going to paint with a color of my own choice, and that's why I'm using a brush mask, or a texture mask rather, because I'm going to paint with a darker brown color, just like that, maybe even darker, so I'll press Ctrl Z and go darker. I like that, maybe not quite so dark. I like that. I might adjust the scale a little bit. So over here in the node editor window, I'll go back to this node. I'll change the scale. In fact, yeah, I'll just do it here. So I'll change the scale to 0.15 to make the dots smaller, and maybe a lighter shade of brown. Ooh, I kind of like that actually. It's kind of giving me an interesting effect there. I like that. I'm not going to paint it over here. I'm going to make it more even by painting in this window. So you'll notice that because, and I think there's a lock somewhere. It might be that lock there. It'll keep my brushes in sync. So I have the same color, the same texture. In fact, I should get rid of that texture there and only use a texture mask right there. So now it'll be consistent in this window, whereas if I use a texture brush over here, the dots might be different sizes depending on if I zoom in or zoom out. Pardon me, I had to pause the video there and get a glass of water. My throat was quite raspy. I have a cold right now, and it's going around. So let's go ahead and jump back in. I'm going to paint with a texture mask, and I have that darker brown color selected. So in the black areas, this is what a mask does. In the black areas, it will not paint of your texture, but in the white areas, it will paint the color of your choice. We're using a blend mode mix, so it's just replacing the color of my background or the color below with the new color. If I picked a different blend mode, it would do something different. But let's go ahead and press F on my keyboard and choose a different brush size. And if I paint now, you can see, hopefully, oh, okay, the dots are showing up, but they're just too light. So I'll press Control Z. I'll turn the strength up to 1. Let's see how they look now. They're still too light. I guess they show up differently in this window versus this window. So I'll make that brown color darker. And now I have the effect that I want. In fact, I'll make that a bit lighter. Let's make that a little bit lighter. There we go. I like that. So let's go ahead and zoom out, and I'll paint that same dots over the entire image. In fact, I think these dots are too spaced out, so I'm going to adjust my texture. I'll go back over here, and I'm going to select that same texture, and I'm going to change my size down to 0.05 so the dots get closer together. Let's try seeing how that looks. I'll paint again. In fact, I think I have to undo my texture from before, because with the mask it's just going to paint over whatever is already there. And let's see how this looks. Okay, so be forewarned that when you're painting in Blender, it can be quite slow, especially if you have a large 2048 by 2048 image. So it was a little bit laggy there as I was painting that out, but I sped it up for you for the sake of this tutorial. Great, so I have a nice spotty texture here, but there's a problem. Because I painted in this window, because I want it to be nice and even, the size of the dots across the entire donut, we have a resulting kind of artifact here, and that is, if I look at where the seams are, like right there, you can see that the dots don't line up. And that's because there might be an area where like that edge might line up with maybe one of these edges, so the dots might not flow nicely from one face to another face. The way we can fix that is by using the clone brush. So in the 3D viewport, I'm going to do a little bit of painting, and let's say if you were modeling something like an orange and adding a texture to it, like the fruit orange, you might get some seams, and so you would want to use the same technique to get rid of the seams on your orange, or maybe you're modeling a potato or something like that and you need to get rid of the seams on your potato. This is how you would do it. So let's go ahead and change the brush to a clone brush, and again I need to put my 3D cursor where I want to copy from. I want to look at my object from a straight on angle as much as I can where I'm painting at any current time. So I'm going to press F on my keyboard to make a smaller brush, and I'm going to put my 3D cursor maybe right around there. So I'm going to left click with the control key held down, and that will, with the control key held down, that'll put my 3D cursor right there. And so now if I press F to make my brush a little bit smaller, I can paint, and it will paint from that location. I might want to choose a harder brush. This brush has a feather right now, so I'll press Control Z on my keyboard. I'm going to change the curve of the brush to something else, maybe even to a solid curve like that. So now if I paint, and I believe we have a transparent brush, so that's not helping, it will not give me any kind of residual edges as long as I'm careful. So I'm going to go around in fast forward and paint over all of my seams, making sure to move my 3D cursor. If I orbit around to a different side, I want to make sure I hold control and left click to put my 3D cursor in a new location that matches where I'm painting. Alright, so I finished cloning out most of the edges on my donut. I did not do a very good job. There are many places where you can see kind of where the edge of my round brush is. In fact, I still see a seam right there, so I'll just quickly fix that. I'll hold Control and left click to put my 3D cursor right there, and I can paint out that seam and hopefully not get too many artifacts while I'm doing that. So there we go. So there we have it. Let's go ahead and start adding the icing. We're going to have pink icing on the top surface of the donut. We're going to add sprinkles as well. To make the curve of the pink icing on the outside edge and the inside edge of the top of the donut, I'm actually going to use my curve brush stroke style. So I'm not going to use the clone brush anymore. I'll go back to the text draw brush, our normal brush. I'll go back up to the brightest color and I'll choose a pinky color. Like that. I could just go in and paint. Oops, I still have a texture on there. I could just go in and I'll get rid of that texture mask from before. No texture or texture mask. And I could just paint in my icing, but I'm going to use a curve instead so we get a nicer, cleaner line. I don't want the icing to be feathered at all like it is right there. It has a blurry edge, so I'm going to change it to a solid circle like that, and you can see I get quite jaggy edges on it. A curve will help. So I'm going to make the strokes style or method not space, but I'll use the curve instead. And the good thing about the curve is that you can reuse it. So I'm going to go to the side of my donut like that, and I'm going to hold Control down and left click and drag to create that first point with a round Bezier curve. I'm going to go down a little bit. I'll right click and grab that one to make it more smooth, and then I'll go over here, left click and drag like that, and I'm going to go back up like that, and I will press enter, and that will create a line that's way too thick though, so I'll press Control Z to undo. When you bring your mouse out of that 3D viewport, it will make the line disappear, but it'll come back, so don't worry about that. Let's make that line thinner, so I'll tap F on my keyboard and pick a width like that and press enter. Great. Now if I orbit, I can keep that same curve, and if I kind of match how far away I am, I can reuse it kind of like this. So I'm going to reposition it, make sure this lines up roughly, and press enter. I'm going to undo that because it wasn't matching up very well. There, good. Let's reuse it over here like that, and I can just clean up the edges if I need to later. So like that. Good. I'm not worried about the inside because we're going to paint this manually. Like that, just about. In fact, can I get the entire thing in? Let's see. Looks good to me, so let's press A a few times to get rid of, or to select all these points, and I'll press X on my keyboard to get rid of the curve. So now I have that nice curve all the way around the outside. We'll do the same thing on the inside. You can still see I have some seams that are really bad here, but we will hopefully cover most of them up. So I'll hold Control down and left click. In fact, I'll undo that, Control Z, hold Control, left click, and drag to make that first point. I'm not going to do as many curves here just because it's so tight on the inside. I'll grab that one and move it over, and I'll do that. Perfect. So I'll press enter. I can orbit around. Let's see if I can match that up. And I'll press enter, and now we have a nice curve that goes quite far down into the middle of the donut. Great, let's go ahead and I'll press A a few times to select all of those points. I'll press X on my keyboard, and I'm just going to paint in manually this top area. It's quite big. It's bigger than I wanted it to be originally, but oh well. Let's go ahead and change our stroke method back to space, and maybe I'll turn the spacing down a little bit to 5. And I'll press F to make the brush bigger. And if I go to my top view with the 7 key on my numpad, I can paint in, I'll make the brush a little bit bigger there, and I can paint in the area pretty quick. Alright, great. So I have that pink now filled in. At this point, I want to do a little bit of shading. I want to make it look like the pink is popping out, just using shading and darkening and lightening from the actual pastry of the donut. So let's go ahead and change our brush up a little bit. I'll change my brush back to all white That's with RGB. We need them all at 1, and then I can change my color down to black. I'm going to change my blend mode now. I have many options here. I'm going to choose darken at first. I might try a few different things. I'm not that familiar with these blend modes myself, but I kind of struggle through. So I'm going to do a few passes. That means I'm going to go over the edge several times. I'm going to make my brush right now, it's set to a hard curve. I'm going to make it a very soft curve. So if I go over the edge, but I make this very transparent, that means down to about 0.1 or so. And I start off with my brush quite small. I'm going to do several passes. I'll speed this part of the video up. You'll see me going around with quite a small, and I'll press Shift F to make this a little bit darker, with quite a small brush, and then I'll do a bigger brush and a bigger brush, and you'll see what it looks like. I'll do both inside and outside all sped up. Okay, so I finished shading with about 4 or 5 passes at different sizes of brushes using the darken blend mode with just black on the inside and the outside of the pink icing. So if I orbit around, you can kind of see what's happening here. I think I've actually gone too dark with these shadows. So what I might want to do is lighten things up a little bit. I could do that in a few ways. I'll change my brush color to white. And I think I will choose, what is it? I believe it's luminosity. And if I paint with luminosity, it'll just sort of lighten things up and get rid of the shadows to some extent. So I'll press Shift F on my keyboard to adjust the strength of the brush to quite low. And I'll paint over the shadow area to kind of brighten things up a little bit, but not too much. So in fact, I think that's probably too much. So Shift F, and I'll make this even more transparent like that, and just brighten things up a little bit as best as I can. Let's go around the donut. Okay, so we have things looking quite 3D. I might just play around with this brush, make things a little bit brighter here and there as I see fit. What I'll do next is actually change the blend mode to screen, I believe it is, and make my brush quite a bit smaller. And now if I go along the top of the icing, I can give it a nice highlight. So if I make it a bit stronger, Shift F, and make it a little bit stronger there, you can see what this is going to look like. Shift F, and I'll make it a little bit weaker. And I'm just giving this a nice highlight, a nice kind of sheen. Whoops, there it went. And be able to make one a bit smaller, but more intense, like that. Be not quite so intense. Great. So now I'm kind of getting that nice highlight there on the top of the donut. Maybe I'll want to go to my top view, and I'll press 5 to go to orthographic view, and so now I can trace that circle to make a nice highlight area like that. Great, I think all we have left to do are the sprinkles, and I'm not going to draw each sprinkle individually. That would be silly. I'm just going to draw one sprinkle and shade it nicely and use my clone brush. Now I have not showed you the last method of how I'm going to actually use the clone brush to be able to put sprinkles all in different rotations and different colors on the top of the icing. So let's go ahead and open up. We'll make the UV image editor window larger. I'm going to make sure this image is packed as a PNG and it's saved. And I'm going to press the X button to get rid of that image just from the window, and I'm going to make a new image. So I'll press new, and I can just make it 124 by 124 like that, and I'll press enter after I give it a name. I'm going to call it sprinkle like that, and I'm going to make sure that the background color, this is very important, the background color is going to be all white. So I'll make RGB all 1, and I'm going to make sure that it's alpha, the A value is set all the way down to 0. That means it'll be see-through. That's what I want. I want a 1024 by 1024 image that has no background, just a checkerboard transparent background. Great. In this image, I'm going to draw one sprinkle. So I'm going to use the curve brush I'm going to make sure that I have this image packed as a PNG, and I'm going to go and change my view mode to paint mode. I'm going to make sure that the textures are all cleared out. I'm going to make the stroke into a curve. I'm going to hold Control and left click and Control and drag, and there we go. I can make this right about like that, and I'll press enter to see how we're doing here. Oh, I still have the blend mode set to screen, so I'll change that back to mix. I'm going to make this have a color. Let's go ahead and make a orange sprinkle, and I'll press enter. Ooh, that's way too see-through, so I'll press Control Z, and it's way too small, so I'll make it a strength 1. It's set to mix. I'm going to make the brush curve set to solid all the way through, so I press enter now. We get a very long sprinkle. I'll make the brush bigger, so I'll tap F on my keyboard. I'll make it about that big, and let's see how that looks. That looks like a pretty good sprinkle. It's a little bit not centered, so I'll make it a little bit smaller in the middle of my square. Yeah, I'm making a huge sprinkle, and that's okay. That looks okay, but it's a little bit too big, so I'll just move it down a little bit, and I'll make it a little bit narrower, and I'll press F. Good. I had the sprinkle that I want. I'll press A few times and then X to delete those points, and I'll change my paint stroke back to space mode so I can just paint normally. I'm going to do some shading here, so I'll speed this part of the video up. I'm going to do this exactly the same way that I made the icing shaded. I'm going to go over the edges several times with different sizes and different transparencies of darken. Where's darken? Right there with black, just so it looks rounded. So I'll come back in just a sec. Alright, so I finished painting the sprinkle. I actually went over the entire thing to even out the different shades with the luminosity blend mode paintbrush with white. That kind of helps to brighten things up if things get too dark. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to set my brush to black, and I'm going to change my blend mode to add alpha, and what that will do is if I make my brush about the right size that I want, a little bit smaller, I can actually paint only in where there is transparency. So we're adding to the alpha of the image only. So if I paint now with a black color, where is my, oh, I'll change my strength up to 1. Actually, I'll change it down to maybe 0.4 or so. I can now paint around the sprinkle, and I'll get a transparent area, and it will not paint on top of the sprinkle, and it'll sort of expand the color that I already have. I think that's how it works. And so now what I can do is I can select darken, because it's using that same sort of orange color as if I had blurred outwards. I can now darken this, so I'll go to darken, and we're set to black, and so now I can just darken out the semi-transparent area. And what this is doing for me, I'm going to undo that a few times. What this is doing for me is it is giving me a bit of a dark inset area, so the sprinkle is sort of in its own little shadow area in the icing. So that's sort of the effect that I want. Now add a little bit of shadow back into there. Perfect. Good, we have our sprinkle. Let's go ahead and make sure we've packed that into our file as a PNG, and I'll do a quick Control S and save. What I want to do now is use this image as a texture to paint onto the pink icing on my donut. And the way I'm going to do that is by creating a custom brush that after I paint all the orange sprinkles, I can quickly change the hue of this image texture brush and then paint as a different color, and then go through and paint different colors of sprinkles as I move around the top of the donut. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to make sure in this window that I am in texture paint mode, and I'm going to change my brush to be white. I believe I have to have it white. I'm not sure though. I don't think it really matters actually. I'm going to make my texture have a new texture. We're going to click on new, and I'm going to name it Sprinkle Brush. And that's all in caps. That's okay. Over here, I'm going to make sure it is a image or a movie, that's what I want, but I'm sure that if I go over here to my node editor window and it's set to sprinkle brush, I've got the right one selected. If I click on use nodes, it's going to reset it to a checker anyway. I don't know why that is. And I'll press X to delete the checker node. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to, and things have kind of shuffled around a little bit here. If you're used to adding nodes for materials, things are in different spots. I have to input an image. It's not in textures for some reason. It's under input, image. I'll add that to there. I'll open my sprinkle image. And so now, if I paint, you might be able to see sprinkles in some sense. It's kind of tiling them, and it's going very slowly. You can kind of see adding them in the wrong places on the image. I'll press Ctrl Z. When you're painting with a large image file like this, you will want to make sure you're saving often because things can crash. So we're not going to do it that way. Obviously, we have our brush mapping set to tiled, which is not what we want. Instead, I'm going to use STENCIL. And I haven't talked about this one yet. We've talked about tiled and 3D. STENCIL actually brings up on my screen an overlay of the image. If it was a square image, you would actually see it sitting over top, but it's transparent. If you want to move it around, you can right-click on it and drag it. If you want to scale it, you can hold Shift and right-click and drag up and down, or left and right, pardon me. So I'm holding Shift now, and I'm right-clicking with my mouse and dragging to the left to make it smaller. You can see that it stays hovering over my 3D viewport, and it'll stay no matter how I orbit or zoom or pan, it'll stay exactly where it is unless I right-click and drag it. So I'm going to put it exactly where I think it should go. I'm going to zoom in. If you hold Control and right-click and drag, you can rotate it. If you hold Control or Shift rather and right click, you can scale it by dragging left and right. Control and right click and drag rotates. So you can put this any which way you want. So I'm going to go and orbit my scene. So I'm looking at this from the side. I want a pink sprinkle right there. I'm going to zoom in, and that will make the sprinkle smaller in comparison. And I've got my brush set to darken. I want it to be mixed just like normal. My strength should be at 1, and great. Let's go ahead and paint that. And as you can see, that's what it looks like. If I orbit around, you can see it's left there. I don't want to put all pink sprinkles, so I'm going to rotate my view and kind of put it all over the place. Maybe I'll put one over there, and so I'll paint. I'm trying to keep the same scale consistency here. So let's put one right there. So I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to go through and put orange sprinkles all over this, but spaced out enough that I can do a few passes with different colors. Okay, so I have orange sprinkles on my donut. In order to change the color, it's very, very easy up here in the node editor window with sprinkle brush selected or active. If I press Shift A on my keyboard, I'm going to bring up the add menu. I'm going to add a new color node. It's going to be the hue saturation node. I'll put that right in the middle of this noodle. All I have to do now is change the hue here. If I hold Shift, it'll let me drag and make it more accurate. So let's go ahead and left click and drag with the Shift key held down. And as you can see now, I get different colors. It goes all the way from negative 0.5 up to 0.5. I like that aqua color, so I'm going to go through and put that aqua color of sprinkle all over the donut. And then I'm going to go through and add a few more colors all in one go. So I'll see you in just a moment. Alright, so I finished going through and adding all of the sprinkles to the donut. I added about 5 or 6 colors all across. Of course, you can do it in the style that you like. The very, very last thing that I might do is I might go through and add a few more highlights to the sprinkles just to make them really pop. I also might add some extra shadow to one side of the sprinkles if I feel like going through manually. So in that case, I would get rid of my brush image, and then I would go through with either a darken brush, so right there with black, and I would just go up to some of the sprinkles and add just a little bit more of a shadow, of course, with a soft brush. I've got my curve set to, actually it is quite soft. I just need to turn the Shift F, turn the strength way down. So if I add some extra shadows here and there to the bottom side of the sprinkles, that will really help to sell it, as well as with a screen blend mode and white. I might want to add some extra intensity to the highlight with a smaller, harsher brush. Maybe I'll turn that down a little bit to the tops of some of the sprinkles, especially on the top, just to really sell it and make it pop. But that will be it for this tutorial on using texture painting in Blender. If you learned something in this video, please go ahead and click on that like button below this video. And if you want to see more videos just like this one in Blender and in tech, go ahead and click on that subscribe button below. If you want to follow me on Facebook, my Facebook page is facebook.com/borncg. On that page, I give previews and sneak peeks, and I ask questions, and people can post comments and questions that they have and send me messages. So go ahead and follow me there. But that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.